How can you value technology stocks? That's going to be the topic of today's video. So if you're an expat or a high net worth individual, go over to infuriated.com and see how I can help you. Now on this video, I'm going to talk about technology stocks. How can you value them correctly? Now, it's a very difficult question, and it reminds me of the webinar I did over a week ago, or close to a week ago now, with Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, and he made a really interesting point that I've made before, and that's that when it comes to technology stocks, you can't really value them in the traditional way. The traditional way of valuing a stock is to look at things like the price to earnings ratio, forward price to earnings, and sometimes CAPE ratios. But the issue with technology stocks is a lot of them have scaled by reinvesting income back into the business. So for example, Amazon. If you look at Amazon and you type in Amazon and you look at their kind of, P to E ratio on Google or whatever, you'll actually find that for many years, in fact, over a decade, they look overvalued. However, what Jeff Bezos did was he kept reinvesting income back into the business. And when it came to the so-called global minimum tax that was going to be brought in, well, I think it still is going to be brought in 2 years. Many campaigners who I disagree with, but anyway, said that, well, this won't affect Amazon because they're not actually the most profitable company in the world, because what they're doing is they're getting loads of revenue, they're reinvesting that revenue back into the business and so on. So now few people would say that Amazon is necessarily overvalued as a stock, but people said that for years, even over a decade. So when it comes to technology stocks, the sales growth is usually the strongest indication of how well a stock is going to do long term. Now, don't get me wrong, not every stock is going to be like Amazon, and eventually it's not going to be possible for a company to be, for example, unprofitable and carry on doing well long term. Long term, they're going to actually have to make a profit. But for a lot of technology stocks, what can happen is in the early stages, or even for the first decade or two, they don't actually make that much money on purpose, and they're playing the long game, they're reinvesting money back into the business. So long term, they're going to be profitable. So I think that's the best way to actually value a technology stock and see how good a technology stock's future could be. Again, I wouldn't actually invest necessarily in individual tech stocks unless you really know the area. But when it comes to NASDAQ, when people say, oh, the NASDAQ's now worth 16,000 and it looks overvalued compared to the S&P 500. Yes, on traditional measures, but you have to look at things like sales growth, which have gone out of control since the pandemic. How can I help you? In 2 ways. First of all, are you an expat, a high net wealth individual, or just somebody who lives in a part of the world where it's difficult to get access to quality investment solutions? In which case, go onto my website on infuriated.com and find out more. If you don't fit into any of those categories, then in which case there's a range of free material on my website, on this YouTube channel, and indeed on my Quora, where I get over 200 or have received over 231 million views in the last few years. And finally, if you want to actually read my thoughts in more detail, go onto Amazon and find my book on there.